Так, уважаемые коллеги,
Dear
прошу занимать
colleagues,
места.
please be seated.
Мы переходим
We are
от обозревания выставленных экспонатов и обхода экспозиции к обсуждению актуальных вопросов устойчивого развития Республики Беларусь. Перед вами выступят представители основных организаторов сегодняшнего форума. Это Министерство энергетики, природных ресурсов, Департамент энергоэффективности, а также представитель Киевского Шенец Леонид Васильевич, директор департамента по энергоэффективности, ну и ряд наших зарубежных гостей и экспонентов ключевых, которые участвуют в нашей экспозиции. Владимир Александрович Закревский предлагает сделать вместо какого-нибудь длинного выступления перечень проблем, вопросов и
some long speeches, have some questions and answers, and getting some feedback from the participants of our conference. So he suggests this format. Actually, every speaker may enjoy this opportunity and select his or her own format of communication with the audience. Vadim Alexandrovich, the floor is yours. Thank you. Dear colleagues, I see many familiar faces from specialized organizations and entities representing the energy sector. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you at this event and thank you for the work we are doing together jointly, and briefly keep you informed about the results we have so far within this 5-year period. And I propose, in case there are some specific questions you are interested in, to dive deeper and discuss something in particular, but I will try from my end to provide you with some clarifications you may be interested in, because the international cooperation in the area of power sector is very wide and vague. I will start from the very beginning, and the core thing, yes, we have very wide contacts and cooperation with international organizations, entities and structures by participating in different international platforms, union entities, and it's true that with the neighboring countries we have tight contacts in the energy sector, including some parallel work of our energy systems, and therefore by developing all these relations and contacts we are reliant on the slogan of the energy security. Energy security is viewed and actually is a priority for all our agendas, is the cornerstone of all our agendas we pursue, and we treat all our relations with the neighboring countries of Belarus from the perspective of the energy security of the country. The comprehensive program, national program, which is being implemented at present in the energy system, is aimed to address a number of issues and challenges in the area of energy security, including construction of the NPP and the update of our physical assets, our generation assets, and different variants of other sources, diversification of other sources of energy, including renewable energy and the power grid infrastructure. And the main goal is to ensure access and supply of power to consumers by cheap, competitive and reliable power energy generated from cutting-edge energy technologies. And we rely on this, and backed by this we say that both the NPP and our conventional energy sources fired on gas and other fuels are to operate to get the effect which results in the prime cost, which is affordable for our domestic consumers. And therefore, the nuclear power plant is one way of diversification of energy resources. This includes the development of RES as well, since this is again the diversification and reduction of our dependence on the supplies of gas, natural gas from other countries. And at present we are pursuing the work on the formation of energy markets with our neighboring countries. Yes, it's true that the Soviet legacy enables us to state that we have very powerful and wide contacts with neighboring countries operating in the synchronized zone, including Baltic states, Russian Federation, Ukraine, and non-synchronized zone, which includes European one, in the south, the Polish territory. So these are the prospects which could be addressed at the diplomatic dimension and level. Because from the perspective of the economy, the power which is generated by the energy sources of Belarus over the last time is rather competitive. We feel it, judging by the balance we form, and therefore, in case I start talking about the ultimate goal for the power system does not develop for the demands of experts unless this is a standalone investment contract which aims to supply energy to neighboring countries or the regions or an island. The country itself develops its energy system based on its domestic needs and demands for power, gas and thermal energy based on the needs and demands of its domestic consumers. But it happened that after the Soviet Union, as soon as it transformed into an independent state, and since a number of countries reduced their evolution of the development, there was some proficit of the installed capacity which is to be used either to phase out and replace it with more efficient sources or to consume this power in the form of exports of power generated by these energy sources. And actually we enjoy this opportunity. And in terms of our two formations, you are aware that Belarus is a member state of the Eurasian Economic Union, comprised of 5 member states that make one economic space, political space, an economic one. And it's clear that energy domain is a key there, since it affects the real economy development in terms of making it more competitive, and we clearly understand this. And therefore, when we shape our combined power markets, including markets of gas and oil products, we rely on those prospects and those obligatory necessity to be preserved for Belarus in this sector. And we understand that the conditions should be equal in all the 5 member states, meaning that all the 5 member states shall have equal competitive environment. And here we understand the primary energy source, and in terms of the energy sources and oil development, oil sector development, the model shall be the same. And in this regard, we need to take a long journey because the countries are totally different in terms of their organizational structure and the system governance, they're totally different. There are countries that for the last 10 years have been operating under the market conditions and have already formed both the wholesale and retail market of power, and there is the stock exchange of power. Now I'm referring to Belarus, then I'm referring to the Russian Federation, but in Belarus the market is not available yet. And in the near future we will have to shape and form this framework. And for this, it will take us about 4 years to transform our energy system to meet and be compliant with those requirements developed and applicable to 5 member states. And we will accordingly use it. And we develop our relations in the Union state as well. For the time being, I cannot more or less specifically inform you about these developments because there is the large-scale work covering many aspects, including energy market building, but I may assure you that it will be even tighter contact and cooperation under the framework of the Union state, and a package of issues in the form of different roadmaps are being developed. And we hope that our stance and position will be incorporated into the documents ratified, and since 2021 we will operate under new conditions. And most importantly, they are those benefits and advantages our energy system may have when the conditions of operations become equal compared to the generators from the Russian Federation when they use the same resource fired on natural gas. And we do plan that our balance by 2021 will be substantially altered and changed. And here I refer both to energy and power balance and the overflow of this. And I find this very promising, but at the same time, there are a number of risks to address, and the burdens we may not avoid very quickly and promptly, and we need to address these. And here I mean the difference of our governance systems and making them similar. But nonetheless, there should be some similar paradigm of the market building. This includes the issue of cross-subsidies, which actually slows down our entrance to the market and emergence of the competitive advantage in a country, because this is the legacy of all the 5 member states. It is present. All these states have some signs of cross-subsidies. And another issue is some issues with the cross-border countries, the intention of the Baltic states to avoid, to get rid of this synchronized work with former Soviet Union countries. But I believe, yes, it is possible, and for us, it will not be quite beneficial from the perspective of the sustainable operation of the energy system. We will have to make some transformations in the system, but at the same time, one must understand that at present the Baltic states are not ready to operate fully independently in harmony with the continental Europe, because their balance of powers will never cover from the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation export its energy there, and actually the system is not sustainable at all, and therefore it is feasible to improve and to strengthen these contacts, beneficial for the Baltic states to have it. But actually this is the decision of the energy-related entities in these states and their use of our balances, and if they need it, we will participate, but if not, if there is the cease of this, then we will reformat our work to other power grids. We have good relations with the neighboring countries in the southern part, in the south. Maybe this is temporary phenomena. I'm referring to Ukraine. Probably this is a perspective, but nonetheless, the country intends to synchronize its system with NCE, European continental system, and it will demand from us the development of the technical regulations and the direct current incorporation, and the only challenge is how fast they will be able to deploy all this. So these are those issues we need to take into account in the future in our strategy and in the external dimension paradigm. In terms of the internal system, we may state that 100% of the population is provided with power, and this is one of the indicators of SDGs, which we are fully compliant with, and now we work to make sure that this power supply is sustainable and most competitive in terms of its cheap price and affordability. Its price should be economically justified and formed. We must not say that the price of power shall get cheaper and cheaper, because as soon as we say that the price of power is hitting its lowest bar, this is a risk for the development of the system, because any system must develop. In case the price of power is very cheap, it will generate the issue of cross-subsidization, and it's clear.
Therefore, we can see a certain flexibility in pricing for electrical energy, but we cannot go lower than that. I'm speaking about the production cost. And you just have to trust me. This is a justified pricing. All these price increases are difficult, and there's an independent regulator that assesses the cost price and the production cost and the pricing tariffs. Colleagues, if I can explain this in more detail, please ask your questions. I would like to ask you to be brief in your questions. We have microphones here, so please use them to ask your questions. And we have to discuss the things in the end as well. The microphone is here. Sapožnikov from the Belarusian Scientific and Technological University. I'm very much concerned about the Belarusian NPP. You cannot put electrical energy in your pocket. You cannot save it. And without hydro energy, nuclear energy is always insufficient. Ukraine had an excellent example. They have it in the most balanced way. Take a look at Lithuania. They had the Kaišiadorys hydroaccumulating station. Have you negotiated, or you are going to negotiate, to build a similar station in our country? Because then otherwise we would be perfectly saving this energy by pumping water into the cascades. Thank you very much for your question. I have been working on this issue, and I can give you an exhaustive answer. Indeed, the energy system is small in Belarus, and the nuclear power station will certainly require to adopt certain measures to adopt the load throughout the day. If we had a large country, it would be easier for us to tackle it. then we would be able to easily integrate the NPP into the energy system. We sent our request to Lithuania about 2 years ago. We used our diplomatic channels. We visited the Kronio. We acquainted with the equipment. They have an excellent pumping station. It's in a perfect technical shape. Indeed, it would be able to be a generating capacity, and it would be work in conjunction with the Belarusian NPP. This is not the only solution, but this is a very right solution when a hydro station is balancing this, when you have this hardly regulated NPP. But we suggested this to the Lithuanian counterparts. We suggested this to make it cost-efficient way, and we wanted to have a dedicated grid, and we would allocate the pumping equipment, but they refused. They refused in a clear way without any compromise, and we perfectly understand that this is the thing that could be useful to the Lithuanian counterparts. But still, now we are undertaking other measures in order to balance the current coming from the NPP. But we wouldn't use the hydropower station, but other stations, other systems. Maybe not the best way to do it alternatively, but we do not have such terrain in order for us to locate a hydropower station and for us to address 800 megawatt. Maybe we could find space for 250 megawatt, but not for 850, and that would require significant investments. Therefore, it would not address the issue fully as we needed. And the decisions that we make in our energy system are cheaper, and second, they enable us to regulate the load. I believe you understand what we speak about. So this generation capacity will be addressed. There could be another option. The Republic of Belarus could also be supplied from the Russian Federation in case of a shutdown. There are grids for 330 and 750 megawatt, and we would tackle it. But this is a disadvantage that we have. Indeed, economically, we would have contractual agreements with them, but this is again the issue that has not been fully understood by Russia. We have certain limitations. We'll have to compensate some energy in case the nuclear power plant is shut down. Then we will have to either strengthen the grid or to get connectivity from Russia, but we don't have time for that. We worked on this issue 2 years ago, but the solutions that have been made are rapid to deploy and they are cost efficient. And I can foresee that there are questions that may sound about accumulating electrical energy in batteries, but you will not find any battery station that would be a substitution. Yes, this is the right way to develop this idea, but this is not what is feasible today, considering the compensating supercondensers that are installed. 800 megawatt to be given to the grid from some other source. This is not what we can do. This is not feasible, and we wouldn't be able to apply this approach in our energy system. Therefore, we will have the peak and reserve load. One more question, and then we proceed with the next presentation. Otherwise, we will be out of schedule. Vadim Alexandrovich, please advise. As you know, in Egypt, Rosatom is building its nuclear power plant, It will be the first in Africa and in Middle East. If we take a look at the Belarusian NPP, as I understand, this is almost ready to run. What are the prospects of relations between Belarus and Egypt? And what can be the cooperation between the two countries? And the last thing about e-cars. How do you plan to deploy electronic vehicles, and do you plan for them to be used here widely? What are the plans? Speaking of the prospects of nuclear energy in Egypt, I've heard of it. Considering that the Republic of Belarus is a young member of this IAEA community, of the nuclear energy community, I would advise you in terms of capacity building and cooperation to deal with those who have a large-scale experience. I'm just speaking on my own behalf. It is clear that we are ready to cooperate with you. We are ready to have some dialogue, but we are speaking about highly technological equipment, and the personnel shall be super qualified. Therefore, let us work with our NPP for some time, and then sometime after, we will be sharing our practices with others. Speaking of e-mobility, we have an operator that deploys the charging stations across the country. And it is clear that there are new opportunities for e-mobility. But you have to understand, indeed, we need to grow energy consumption in the country, but the promising market of e-vehicles by 2025 will be about 36 million kilowatt hours. So this is what is going to be supplied to the charging stations. This will only consume 4 megawatt of the load, and this is insignificant. This is environment friendly, and if we speak about e-cars made in Belarus, then this is import substitution program, and this is very right. We have a negative balance of trade in this commodity group. I mean, as far as cars and vehicles are concerned, because we are imposing them from the Russian Federation and other countries. We import cars and trucks and their spare parts. This applies to the vehicles running on combustion engines. Therefore, we have to replace them by e-cars and e-trucks and use our own electrical energy. This is a good project, and you will see that we are building charging stations along the most intensive highways in the country. Belarusneft, which is the network of the state-owned filling stations in the country, they are installing those charging stations. They are reselling diesel and gasoline, but they are installing charging stations, and this is a paradox that nevertheless, but this is very promising. We will have an opportunity to ask him more questions at the end, and now the floor goes to Mr. Khmelny, who is the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources and Environment Protection in Belarus. Distinguished colleagues, on behalf of the Minister of Natural Resources and Environment Protection of Belarus, I would like to welcome you at this event, and I would like to thank you for participating in this event. I would like to be as brief as possible, and I will outline the key areas of activity of Belarus in achieving the SDGs in our country. The paramount thing is as follows. As you know, the SDG agenda is very topical, and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are the goals that are focused on environmental issues, especially 7 of them. The key priority of the national security of any country in the Republic of Belarus is environmental security and safety. The key areas for developing and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals are defined by the priorities. One of the main priorities in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals is to introduce the green economy principles in any country, including the Republic of Belarus. In principle, green economy is based on three paramount things. Human being, this is number one. Second, economy. And third is environment. And economy and environment are interrelated, as you know. Throughout the period of development of economies, we can see that they're closely related. The green development is paramount to Belarus. Today, Belarus is implementing the National Action Plan to introduce green economy principles until 2020. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I will say that the second priority in achieving the SDGs is the concept of developing sustainable or smart or green cities. This is a very broad topic for discussion, and the key areas implemented in this field have been mentioned by Deputy Minister, like green electrical mobility. Belarus develops e-mobility in cities like Minsk, electrical buses and electrical trains, electrical locomotor systems, and in other towns of Belarus.
There is a program on the introduction of e-trolley buses, and it reduces emissions, first of all, and then reduces the expenditures and costs of infrastructure. In case the trolley bus must drive further, then we save up the costs of additional infrastructure development and construction. And actually, the second issue, most important and vital for Belarus, is the use of wastes. Solid wastes. And actually, this is a challenge not only in Belarus, but in other countries as well. There is excellent experience in foreign countries, which is studied. And as you know, in Belarus, this challenge is under the keen eye of the head of state. And a number of documents have been drafted and are being drafted, including the deployment of the collateral system. Yes, indeed, we are not developing with a fast pace here, but in terms of the green city development, this is an important domain. I will not dwell on the energy efficiency technologies in the production industry and agriculture. This is an important dimension as well. In general, today we have a number of regulations and legal acts which provide for the development of this movement in the country. Another important area of development is the adoption by all the businesses and public authorities and population of some climate mitigation measures, which is in line with SDG 12, and it talks about the emission reduction. You know that Belarus has some obligations. By 2030, we shall ensure the reduction compared to 1990, the reduction by 28%. How can we do it? It is possible to be done through the deployment and use of new technologies for emission treatment. This is the development and scale up of electronic transport vehicles, which actually affect a lot the amount of emissions generated by Belarus. In terms of the renewable energy sources, this morning, as part of both the Italian and Belarusian forum, we discussed this. We are developing the renewable energy in the country. Wind energy about 125 megawatts, solar energy 150, hydro energy 90 megawatts, biogas energy about 40 megawatts at large, but we must discuss the holistic approach to our energy system and those priorities set out for its development. As we understand, the main priority for the development of the large energy of Belarus is the commissioning and operation of the nuclear power plant. Whether it will affect the amount of emissions, no. Because it will never emit emissions. We are not talking about the radioactive wastes because there is an action plan for its utilization and disposal. But in terms of the generation of power by the large energy sources, most energy is generated based on natural gas. The technologies, we will not call it as the dirty one. So actually the technology can survive, but through the cooperation with the Department for Energy Efficiency, the Ministry of Energy is working continuously on the reduction of the consumption of the fuel consumed for generation of heat, and this is in line with the SDGs, and at the same time we meet the principles of green economy. Another important area which is vital for the achievement of SDGs is the rational use of water resources. Now Belarus has the full coverage and supply of these resources for industry and households to meet the needs of the households and population. But at the same time, the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Environment understand their mandate for the protection and conservation of these sources. This is the water treatment, and this is a challenge, and the colleagues present here will support me saying that our wastewater facilities in the communal entities are of poor standing and quality. We've been working hard, and this is actually the mandate of the Ministry of Housing and Utilities. The action plan has been developed, and altogether over 80 water treatment facilities require upgrade and refurbishment and modernization. This is the first thing. And the second one is the contamination of groundwater sources by the operations of some industries and businesses. And we have a lot to do here. And another very important priority for the achievement of SDGs is the environmental education and training, including not only teenagers and kids, but grown-ups as well. And we already have established in Belarus green schools, and a number of activities are being implemented to introduce new progress and approaches and curricula into higher education curriculum and training and education of adults in addition. So these are those goals, dear colleagues, which I mentioned are vital, are the core for the achievement of SDGs. And the strategy until 2030, as I said, is being implemented. At present, we are drafting the strategy for until 2035. Briefly, this is all I wanted to tell you. I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much. You've mentioned so many goals and dimensions, and if we start asking some questions, then we will be beyond our agenda. Let's postpone our questions till the end, because the other speaker may feel upset. Leonid Vasilievich, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. If I may, I will speak from this place. Dear colleagues, the topic we are discussing is of high relevance. The Energy Week in the Russian Federation has finalized quite recently, and I participated in a number of round tables there. And this topic of energy sector is one of the core industries of the economy, without which we may not imagine the development of other industries. And I must tell you that today we treat energy as air. We breathe it in and do not actually notice this. And therefore, the establishment of common markets is a sip of air which increases the sustainability of power energy supply to our consumers. And the Eurasian Economic Union includes 5 member states. Vadim Alexandrovich in his speech actually mentioned this. But I must admit and say that the resources which these 5 member states have, including the Russian Federation at large and the Republic of Kazakhstan, and some amounts in Belarus, but they are enough to cover the demands and needs of the 5 member states. This is 25% of deposits of coal, 7% of oil, and the 4th place in the consumption of power. And it is the 3rd year in sequence we are developing the indicators for this sector in these 5 member states. And actually we meet all the demands. And it means that we are protected from the perspective of the availability of the energy resources, and we have there sufficient numbers for the economy development. I prepared this slide. Please have a look the top line. And generally, I compare this with 1990. You can notice that the total consumption in 1990 was about 8,000 million fuel equivalent, but now this is 13,000. And the forecast for 2030 that there will be double increase, and therefore the concern of energy and availability of energy resources actually is of high relevance, meaning that the demand will increase. In terms of the demand in the 5 member states of the Eurasian Economic Union, at the bottom you see that the total consumption in 2015 is 71 million fuel equivalent. And this pace will increase by 0.5% in view of the GDP rate growth and in view of those energy efficiency programs being implemented under the framework of these 5 member states. Dear colleagues, the major consumers of the resources are industry, agriculture, all our consumers. And to meet all these requirements and for the economy to operate and our consumers to consume the resources, and I often say that today industry is very demanding for the supply of energy, so they do not stand only even a few seconds of gaps in the supply. And moreover, the population, the households, you may stop the supply of energy for at least a few minutes and immediately you receive a lot of phone calls. So, and for all this, we need the resources available, and therefore accessibility of resources and the conditions must be equal, and the price of these resources and the well-developed infrastructure and all these aspects I've mentioned can be addressed in the left corner. This is done through the establishment of common energy markets. And our presidents in May 2014 signed an agreement, and Section 20, you see it, which is devoted to energy sector and the establishment of common energy markets. Therefore, here I will not go into details and speaking on this, but a bit later I will say that under this agreement of May 2014 and the concept notes have been developed, the program for the formation of energy systems and oil as well, and the principles which are covered, they provide for the establishment of equal conditions, and based on these approaches, actually these are those values which we use to establish the common market for our 5 member states. Dear colleagues, nonetheless, today we say a lot about the wind energy and other sources, and I would like to speculate on it in detail. Look, under the framework of 5 member states. We have enough capacities in Belarus, over 10%, Kazakhstan 22,000 megawatts, Kyrgyz 3.3, and Russian Federation is 250,000 megawatts. And these capacities are actually enough to cover the full demand for power in these 5 member states, and even supply this power to third countries. But in terms of the domestic consumption, I will tell you that as of the end of 2018, we actually reached the level of the consumption in 1990. 2018 and its level of consumption is comparable to the level of consumption in 1990. And the consumption in 1990 and 2018, they are equal. And actually, you can compare the standing of the energy systems, how they look like in terms of the expenditures. And there were, so compared to 1990, there was almost 40,000 megawatt installed capacity increase. And the prime cost of the generation of power actually reduced, and most of you will ask this question because the fuel component account for a major part of the prime cost. Nonetheless, there is the reduction in the costs and expenditures, and it's not actually the reality. Look, at the bottom, the Russian Federation, 309 grams in 1990, it was 308, meaning that in 1990 the energy system was not worse than today's one. In terms of Kyrgyz Republic, the figure is different.
In 1990, it was 322 grams. You can see its growth. In Kyrgyz, it is 94% of hydro energy, and you will see that this varies, but even those 5 to 6% are the fuel consumption per kilowatt hour is not less than before. Speaking of Republic of Kazakhstan, 344 grams per kilowatt hour, and this is 375, and only the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Belarus have reduced the fuel consumption per 1 kilowatt hour generation. Colleagues, when we used to work in a single system, then the system looked good, and science has been developing. We are building new highly efficient capacities, but ultimately we did not achieve what we wanted. Speaking of the pricing, naturally a critical role is played by the share of the resources in the production cost of fuel is what depends on. And certainly we can balance this once we start working as a single space in the market, and this is about the 5 countries, and certainly we will remove these disbalances. In order for the market to be operational, naturally we will have to develop the number of regulatory documents. Speaking of 2019, we have fulfilled all the goals that were set to us by the leaders of the nations, and we had our agendas, and we have implemented these agendas in all dimensions. In order for the energy market to be operational, we need a contract, concept, program, which we have. And in March 2019, when we celebrated 5 years of the Union, of the Eurasian Economic Union, we concluded the contract of a single energy market. We also have to work out the single market, the access rights, and the throughput capacity rights that will have to be drafted not later than July 1st, 2022. I need to say that to a certain extent we are reworking this document because the principles that were in the international contract or in the protocol dated May 2019, we had to change it. In 2023, the information sharing rules will be applicable, and they will be based on the rules that I have already mentioned. On July 1st, 2023, they will be in force. Right now we are in a high mobilization phase, and the minister participated in all these activities, and we discussed when these documents can be adopted. And I believe that the presidents of the country will also conclude the documents on creating a single energy market. And not only these documents, but also the commodity, trade, and other rules will be drafted and adopted before a common market is operational. Colleagues, now speaking about gas. Naturally, gas is a fuel and it occupies a significant share of the production cost. I'm coming back to energy generation. From 50 to 70% of the production cost is there, so we have to create equal conditions for the market stakeholders who are using gas. You can see the scope of consumption of natural gas. You see 781 billion cubic meters of gas. Mostly it is from Russia, 725 billion from Kazakhstan, and we also have the gas coming with the oil in Belarus. Consumption 2.5 billion Armenia, 20.5 billion comes to Belarus. Kazakhstan gets 55 but consumes only 14.3. Kyrgyz Republic is the smallest consumer. This is 300 million cubic meters. However, they have a program to use gas in the economy, and they plan that by 2030 they will expand the network, and they will consume 800 million cubic meters, and the Russian Federation consumes 480 billion. If we recalculate it per capita, we can measure consumption of natural gas and electricity. So in Russia it is 3.2 thousand cubic meters. In Belarus it is a bit more than 2,000 cubic meters. Armenia is about 1,000, and in Armenia is Kazakhstan it's about 700, and Kyrgyz Republic is the smallest. Speaking of the penetration of gas, you can see 96-97% is penetration in Belarus. In Russia it is 68.6%. In Kazakhstan it is more, about 70. You can see that in Armenia it is 96%, but you can see that despite the fact that their penetration level is lower in Russia, they have the highest consumption of gas. Now we can take a look at how pricing for gas varies. Starting from 2013 until 2018 in the Eurasian Economic Union, among the 5 countries, the prices varied this way. Colleagues, I would like to show you one more example. I would like to refer to this. This is the data not from us, but from one more structural unit that is working in the Eurasian Economic Union on statistics. Please take a look at it. Here we have 7 things, 7 commodities that are produced from the natural gas. You can see in 2018 the exports was 775,000 tons. However, in monetary terms, this was a little more than $1 billion. Colleagues, again, the same products were imported in the scope, which was 3 times bigger, 2,183,000 tons, and this is equal to almost $4 billion. So we, the 5 countries of the Union, export gas, and then we procure commodities with high added value. If you look at money and divide it by kilograms, then you can see that 1 kilogram was about $1.3, and when we import this, it is $1.8 per kilogram. So we get high added value products. So we are used to using natural gas only to generate heating and electrical energy, but we have to create chemical factories. We have to create production flows with high added value, and we have to do it inside the 5 countries in order, colleagues, for the markets to be operational. And we've discussed it multiple times at the Ministry of Energy in Belarus. And when we shaped the common gas market, I've managed to convince the colleagues that the regulatory documents don't have to be drafted by January 1st, 2025, but earlier, because this is what impacts the economic indicators of the member states of the Union. And we can see that the international agreement that will have the principles of expanding the gas market is going to follow this. Take a look at years 2020, 2021. Russia is the drafter of the documents. However, we drafted it initially, sharing it with them in order for them to put their amendments and to send it back to us, to the 5 countries. And this document is going to be signed in 2022, as well as a number of other documents that will have to be drafted before the common market is created. One of the latest documents is going to be the trade rules by 2023. So the gas market will be operational in 2023, the latest. Now, speaking about the issue that we discussed by the Vice Prime Ministers, the Prime Minister, the Ministers of Energy, this is the topic of making a common electrical and gas markets between the countries and making it faster. We are working on this. Colleagues, speaking of oil and oil products, then again, the main scope of energy production is from Russia. This is 555 million tons last year in Russia, 90 million from Kazakhstan, and Belarus is about 1.6 million tons. Today, you can see local consumption and you can see exports. Today, 42 oil refineries that are processing oil in the 5 union countries as follows. There is no oil refinery in Armenia. In Belarus it is 2, in Kazakhstan 3, in Kyrgyz it is 5. These are small oil refineries, but for 3 years in a row I cannot see them really operational. However, if you take a look at the indicative balance, you will see that about 450 tons is for processing oil, but once the year comes to the end, they would like this to be removed. So they say that they process 100,000 tons that they make themselves, and the rest 32 oil refineries are in Russia. But take a look at this. In such a short time frame, we already see how deep this oil refinery is operating. You can see that this, this is like 25 enterprises, 25 oil refineries have 83.4% fuel recovery, and some of them have 98-99% fuel recovery. So you can see that today oil refineries are actively upgraded within the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union. Distinguished colleagues, for the oil market to be operational, we have to introduce and apply the same regulatory framework that we are working on for gas, oil, etc. But this is the sector that will not move so fast. As I've mentioned, as gas is concerned, we will introduce these new rules in 2023, but as oil is concerned, this will happen on January 1st, 2025. Colleagues, the regulatory documents envisage that we will have the commodity exchanges working on these commodities. At the Commodity Exchange Committee in Russia, we agreed that this year we will try to make mock sales of gas for the 5 countries. Right now we are drafting the roadmap in order for the stakeholders to try how it is to work through the commodity exchanges. But we can see that the peak commodity exchange happened in Russia in 2017, but I think then that at least 25 billion cubic meters will be traded through the commodity exchange, because the Prime Minister of Russia issued an order that Russia will expand its sales of natural gas through the commodity exchange. As oil is concerned, oil is not as fast to grow and to grow in the commodity exchange, but we can see that about 20 million ton of oil goes through the commodity exchange. This is for domestic consumption, so this is the indicator that predetermines the price of oil at filling stations of oil products. And this is how it is being developed. Colleagues, I've already mentioned to you that in 2019 we had the goals set to us by the leaders of the states, and it was a difficult environment, but we've managed to fulfill the tasks set to us. We drafted the documents that we had to draft according to the decisions of the leaders of the states. Now, speaking of the common energy markets, one of the slides provided the price and the production cost of electrical energy. In Kyrgyz Republic it is 2 cents, and in Belarus it is 10 cents, and in Russia it is about 8 cents. And I've mentioned to you that today some energy generating units are not efficient. So we believe that energy efficient generation capacities will continue running, and those that are obsolete, that are not efficient, they will stop working. And speaking about electrical energy, I frequently refer to the following example. This applies both to Belarus and Russia. There are examples of Kazakhstan, when many industrial enterprises build their own generating capacity. Why? For example, you have the price of 2 cents or 4 cents. Buy it in the market, buy it cheap, do not spend money, do not invest in your in-house electrical generation, do not create a separate sector. But this money that is used for that today needs to be used for re-engineering, for upgrading your production flows in order to produce the products that will be competitive not only among the 5 countries but abroad. And I can see that these are the advantages. Speaking of the natural gas, naturally the coverage of the gas network will be growing, and I've mentioned to you that there are 7 types of commodities that we sell less and buy more, and this is about chemical production and others, and I believe that this is what we have to address through our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonid Vasilievich. And again, I suggest asking all the questions at the end of our event. Irina Ivanovna, the floor is yours. Where is Irina? I will do my best to be very brief, since there is some time limit set for every speaker. So highlighting only the most bright pieces of information for you to understand what we are doing in the area of energy efficiency. I don't know where my presentation is. Maybe someone will help me. I would like to note that today we know that there is the state policy for energy efficiency, and with all the problems we can call it successful. Since 2000 we ensure GDP increase without the increase in energy consumption. This is an important step made, which through a number of comprehensive measures and the national policy implemented in the country was achieved. This is our achievement. And today, I think that you know that in 2000, we are finalizing the National Program for Energy Efficiency with its objectives and targets and a number of activities. And what we would like to reach by 2020. We started to draft a new program for the next 5-year period, which is at its final stage of drafting. It is being now approved and discussed. And as a success of our state policy, we can say that in accordance with the data of international agency, so the GDP, the share of the energy consumption is 0.6%, and in 1990 we had the indicator of 3.5 times higher. So saying that today our position, and we are quite comparable to such countries as Canada and Finland. We are on a par with them, understanding that energy intensity of GDP is still 1.3 times higher than the international average, and we have also some work ahead at the national level. We address this. I would like to show you that today, within 2016, from 2016 to 2018, we've implemented in the country of energy efficient activities with the budget of $1.9 billion in total. And you must understand that for each 1 ruble of budget, we spent about 990 rubles from other sources, including loan proceeds, proprietary funds of the enterprises, and some other sources of income and investments. But this is quite a substantial share and distribution, and we are developing quite fast. And today we may boast that one of the steps taken, apart from the activities implemented in the energy-intensive industries and enterprises, we start to involve our population in energy-saving activities. In September, the head of state signed the decree of the president on improving the energy efficiency of multi-apartment buildings, and most importantly, that the state is ready to compensate up to 50% of the costs spent by the households for improving the energy efficiency of the building. And we believe that now the action plan under this decree is being drafted. The draft resolution is being prepared, and we believe that this arrangement in energy efficiency sector will be operational. The document which will support our citizens in their intention to reduce the energy consumption and improve their living of standards. We have good examples of our European partners, other countries, which actually show how it can be structured. I would like to speak in a more detail, since I'm representing the Belarusian, the State Committee for Standardization. We are also addressing this issue from another angle. Today at this exhibition you see that 2/3 of the stands here are the specific products, goods, devices, appliances and technologies, and therefore you cannot enter the market today without meeting some specific requirements and standards. As part of the Eurasian Economic Union, in August, there was a decision made on the adoption of the technical regulation on the energy efficiency of energy consuming devices. 4 countries signed this. Kazakhstan is finalizing this signing stage. They have a special internal procedure, and as far as I assume, by 2021 this new technical regulation will be fully effective, which on the one hand will force the producers of the mass consumption products to meet to make their products more energy efficiency, and it will force the producers to apply cutting-edge and state-of-art technologies. In terms of the environment, under the framework of the Eurasian Economic Union, there is the Technical Regulation 37 on the reduction of the use of hazardous substances in electronic devices, which again will improve the environment in the Eurasian Economic Union space. I would like to tell you that in our 5 countries, This is the first document ever adopted, although in the EU it has a long history and quite extensive experience, but we are at the start of this journey. For all these technical solutions to continue and improve and develop, it's clear that the standards are to be developed, because through the standards the ready-made solutions are provided for new technologies, for new types of products. As part of the state policy for energy efficiency, we developed and we have the program for technical norming and standardization in energy efficiency area. There is a comprehensive program for the Commonwealth of Independent States, and in the area of energy and energy efficiency we have quite a good indicator for harmonization of our standards with international standards. These are the examples of the sectors of economy, and we see that in some sectors this level of harmonization is quite high, meaning that it is quite similar to the international standards, but there are areas where it is not so high. For example, the construction materials, this indicator is only 23%, but please have a look which good indicator we have for energy and energy efficiency sector. This is about 75%, meaning that 75% of our standards are compliant with the international requirements and standards. And how we can implement this? Belarus participates in the operations of international technical committees, and altogether there are over 20 committees and subcommittees at the international level responsible for energy efficiency and energy efficiency in energy sector. At the platform of the Commonwealth of Independent States, we are a member state of which there is a special intergovernmental committee for energy efficiency, and this is done to coordinate our standards, to coordinate the development of the standards that will apply to the industry. The National Program for Energy Efficiency and the Program of Standardization under the National Program for Energy Efficiency does not include a lot of standards, 142 standards, which we expect to plan. So far 104 have been developed, and a smaller part to be finalized by 2020, but we understand how efficient the development is today, and we treat standardization in the area of energy and energy saving. We have standards for wind parks, for renewable energy technologies. We've developed for sustainable development goals, my colleague referred to, a standalone program for the development of standards, by clearly understanding that through the development of standards they include the ready-made solutions to be applied by the industry, and without these standards we may not say about the mass use of technologies for production of goods, and the benchmark year is 2030 to develop these standards, although we understand that we will have to shrink this period. And for example, have a look, we will adopt the standards. A colleague asked about the electric transport, a series of standards to be adopted for power stations. Now, since we are talking about the development of electric transport, in addition to what my colleagues said, we are developing the standards and preparing the infrastructure. There shall be the testing base and infrastructure available to validate everything we are producing and using, that it is fully compliant with the modern requirements. A series of standards have been developed, which quite soon will be adopted, clearly based on the international standards. 30 documents in the area of electric transport. Particular attention is paid to standardization in environment protection domain, and here you see that we expect to develop a series of standards starting from waste disposal. We talked about to the logistics and the disposal of wastes from electric equipment and machines. And as part of the Eurasian Economic Union, there are some gaps, but the technical regulation is to be developed, which is based on the international approaches, will incorporate and deploy appropriate and fair approaches. And actually, this is all I wanted to tell you. I'm ready to answer your questions. But once again, I would like to reiterate, although our colleagues say that we develop quite extensively this system, the energy sector, but the state pays a lot of attention to energy saving and energy efficiency. Thank you very much, Irina Ivanovna. The questions will be postponed, and now I'm passing the floor to Ms. Kristina Haverkamp, because Dana is a multi-year partner of the Environmental Forum of Belarus. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much also for inviting me here. It's the third time I have the honor to participate, and I've always find it, especially today, extremely interesting to listen in particular to the representative of the ministries, because I can see that there is a lot of things happening here in terms of energy transition. Let me introduce you myself briefly. I'm the managing director of the German Energy Agency, which is a company owned by the federal government, and our task is to support the government both nationally and internationally in the energy transition. Energy transition for us in Germany is a question of decarbonization, and that's a challenge. We have been able to save 25 million tons CO2 per year in the first couple of years of our energy transition since 1990, but we have considerably slowed down from 2010 to 2017. It was only 8 million reduction per year, and if we want to reach our goals, which is minus 80% in 2050, at least minus 80%, we will have to increase to a reduction of 20 million tons per year. That is extremely ambitious, and well, I'm not taking bets on whether we will succeed. We as German Energy Agency issued a study as to what needs to be done, and there are, according to us, 3 important pillars. The first has just been mentioned in extenso. Energy efficiency is extremely important. It's also difficult. In particular, when you look at buildings, existing buildings, raising energy efficiency is very expensive, and it's also a social question. When you look at energy efficiency in industry, there's only so much you can do with existing facilities, which means that a considerable rise in energy efficiency in industry might require a complete remodeling or new model of the national industry. This is then where the third pillar, according to us, comes in, which is power fuels. Power fuels, as we understand it, are gases or liquid fuels and feedstocks, which are produced from renewable energies, basically on the basis of hydrogen. What are they good for? They can substitute existing energy carriers and feedstock, which are CO2 intensive, starting with synthetic diesel, going over synthetic kerosene, but also direct use of hydrogen in the industry, in particular in the chemical industry, that can be substituted by green hydrogen. They have, such power fuels have the potential of reducing the cost of energy transition, because what you can do is you can use the existing infrastructure. In Germany, there has been a very intense discussion about the direct use of renewable energies, talking about electric mobility, talking about heat pumps for buildings. That's more efficient, no doubt about that. However, you need a completely new infrastructure for that. When you use synthetic methane, when you use synthetic hydrogen, you can use your pipelines, you can use your heating appliances. So that is considerably cheaper in terms of capital costs. Also, when you take the power fuels road, you don't need to have a large step forward with interrupting everything. You can do it on a step-by-step basis because power fuels can be dropped into existing fossil fuels. You can enrich fossil methane through synthetic methane and thus slowly move on to a decarbonized environment. And last not least, it's a cooperation thing. We in Germany, I go back to that. We in Germany will not be able to produce a lot of power fuels. Other countries have much better conditions. So it is something that can be traded. And I personally believe that trade is something extremely important when it comes to peaceful relationships between nations. Here you can see that according to our study, Germany will need, no matter what scenario, a considerable amount of synthetic e-fuels until 2050, varying depending on the scenario from 155 terawatt hours per year to 908 terawatt hours per year, which is more than a third of our end energy consumption right now. We will be able to produce a bit of that ourselves, especially in the north of Germany. However, we do not have perfect weather conditions, neither for wind nor for sun. And also we are very densely populated, and our population starts to object to a high increase in energy, renewable energies. In particular, windmills are not very popular anymore in Germany. So we will need to import. This, in the beginning, has been met by some skepticism, but we've been able to show that although we will need to import most of our power fuels, it will, in fact, in balance, reduce our dependence on imported fuels, because at the same time, we will be able to go down considerably in terms of importing fossil fuels. So we will never be self-supplying in terms of energy carriers, but we will be less dependent, and maybe not from that many single sources any more than we are these days. Problem with e-fuels is they are pretty expensive. Right now, they are by no means cost competitive. In terms, there are basically two or three factors influencing the price. One is the cost of renewables, so that's going down. We have seen, in particular for PV, we have seen a steep decline in production costs. Same is happening with wind power, but slower. It's the cost of transport, which is very much dependent on the facilities that are there. So is it pipeline, or do you need to cool it down and transport it as a liquid hydrogen, which is much more expensive? But the last, of course, is the cost of technology, in particular the cost of the turning electrolysis, turning power into hydrogen. And there we expect to have very much of a economy of scale in the next couple of years to come. We will need to look at countries that are better set in terms of renewable energies to supply our needs as Germany than we are. And what we see is that the conditions are very different, but it is quite clear that Russia and also Kazakhstan have very, very good preconditions for supplying us with synthetic fuels in the near future. what do we need to do to get there? As far as Germany is concerned, we are, when you look at the market development phases, we are between the first and the second. We have been supporting with quite a bit of money basic R&D into this kind of technology. We are now supporting in a new phase of our energy support program in terms of research, development, but also application, larger scale facilities up to 100 megawatt, which are about to be built in Germany. And when we look at the final phase, which is deployment and large-scale deployment, of course, you need to look at the demand side. Where can you get the power fuels into the market and raise demand? And it will be necessary in the end to introduce some kind of carbon pricing, because otherwise these kind of fuels will not be competitive, in particular in the beginning. And we are set to do that. However, we will do it very carefully. I have to admit, very carefully. We will also have to look at regulations, and regulations basically should target two markets where we see that they are most open for power fuels. One is transportation, because the willingness to pay is very high. So we already have drop-in provisions for biofuels. We personally think that we should have drop-in provisions also for e-fuels. And we also have accepting of e-fuels in view of the CO2 regulation of the European Union. And the other area is industrial uses. Now, industrial uses which are already uses of hydrogen, but steam reformed hydrogen. In particular, we see that when fertilizers are manufactured, and we see that in refineries. But we also look at future uses of hydrogen, in particular the use in connection with the steel industry, where it will help to decarbonize production, could help to decarbonize production considerably. Now, this is not going to happen by itself. There we will also need to use a CO2 price plus probably additional regulation. We see this, and we talked, I talked with Leonid Chinets about that this morning. We see that there is, should be at least, interest in the subject, not only for us as a potential importer, but also for countries that are potential exporters. And I very much see Belarus in view of its nuclear power plant as a potential exporter, I have to say, of hydrogen, because that could be something that you can use to balance your nuclear power plant. And we've been talking about hydropower, but I think large-scale electrolysis might really be an interesting alternative, because it's storage. It's storage, and you can reuse it or you can export it. There's a lot of flexibility in that. We, of course, also see other countries, as I've mentioned, and there is one country that is already getting into that quite seriously, and that is Morocco, where OCP, the world's largest exporter of phosphate fertilizer, is now building a plant with, together with a couple of German companies that will do exactly that, use green hydrogen to export phosphate fertilizer that is CO2 free. Now I'm coming to the end. The subject of the panel is SDGs. We see power fuels to be a contribution to a lot of the SDGs. Of course, affordable and clean energy, SDG 7, but also innovation in industry and infrastructure, SDG 9. We see it as a contribution to sustainable consumption and production, SDG 12. Of course, it's measured for climate protection, so that's SDG 13. And as I've pointed out, because it does require a lot of cooperation between different countries, demand countries, supply countries, transit countries, it's also a potentially large contribution for partnerships in reaching the SDG goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christina. Вопросы будем задавать опять же позже.
We will ask questions later. And now the floor goes to Mr. Günther Pauric, representative of the Austrian Energy Agency and a long-time partner of our forum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Günther Pauric. I'm head of the Department for Energy Economics and Infrastructure at the National Austrian Energy Agency. And today I want to give you some brief information about the Austrian climate and energy strategy and its connections to the Sustainable Development Goals. At the very beginning, I want to give you some information about where do we Austrians stand in the moment. Austria is a small landlocked country in the center of Europe with a very long tradition in the use of renewable energy sources. So in the moment we can cover a share of about 33% of our gross final energy consumption coming from renewable energy sources. In a comparison of the member states of the European Union, as you can see it here on the screen, you can see this is the 4th place. There are only 3 member states, Sweden, Finland, and Latvia in front of us, and we are on 1st place in this comparison. The reason for that is that Austria is a country with high mountains, many rivers, and more than 45% of our landscape is covered by forests. So there is also a very strong wood processing industry in Austria and much forestry. And here you can see that more than half of the renewable energies produced in Austria are coming from bioenergy, especially from the Austrian forests. This is the biomass from the forests. And on the other hand, we have a very high share of electricity generation from hydropower. When we would only look on electricity generation, I could show you that we have already 72% of the electricity generation in Austria coming from renewable energy sources, especially hydropower, but of course also in an increasing amount coming from wind power, solar PV, and also electricity generation from biomass. So this is the point where we stand today, and from this point, starting from this point, the Austrian government has developed an integrated Austrian climate and energy strategy, and we have defined targets which Austria shall reach in 2030. And one of the major targets is that Austria has to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 36% compared to the values of the year 2005. And one additional goal coming from this energy strategy is that Austria wants to reach 100% of green electricity until 2030, which is an annual balance target. That means in 2030, Austria wants to generate as much electricity from renewable energy sources as there is the annual consumption in 2030. But of course, we will have exports and imports of electricity and also some electricity generation from fossil gas. One of the main focuses, in addition to that, is that the strategy until 2030 is focusing on the mobility sector on one hand and on the building sector on the other hand. In the mobility sector, we have to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 31%, which equals to 7.3 million tons of CO2 annual emission. And in the building sector, we have a target to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 3 million tons of CO2 equivalent, which is more than 1/3 of the emissions coming from the building sector. It's 37.5%. And with this approach, our target is that in 2030, the share of renewable energy sources should increase from the 33.5% we have now up to a range of 45 to 50%. And on the other hand, this will also lead to a reduction of the primary energy intensity of Austria compared to 2015. This primary energy intensity should be reduced between 25 and 30%. And all these activities, of course, should be developed under the consideration that the high security of energy supply in Austria, of course, should also be available in 2030 and in the time beyond. Based on this energy and climate strategy, there are some activities ongoing in Austria in the moment. And these current activities are, on one hand, on the energy policy level. There is a new Renewable Energy Expansion Act in preparation. This is an energy act which will provide the framework conditions of the new subsidy scheme for the generation of electricity from renewable energy sources, but also the production of renewable energy in other sectors. And this will be, in the electricity sector, a new system which will lead from the old and traditional feed-in tariff system that we have since 2003 to a new, more market-oriented approach with market premiums and an auction system. And this act is in preparation in the moment. Another important issue, as the building sector is one of the focus sectors of the energy strategy, is of course the development of a national heating strategy which shall define the measures which have to be implemented to reach the CO2 emission reduction in the building sector. And as in many other countries, there are very intense discussions in Austria about the future role of hydrogen in the energy system of Austria, and the responsible ministry in the moment is having a very big stakeholder discussion process for the development of a national hydrogen strategy to bring hydrogen and green gas to the systems for reasons of decarbonization. And last but not least, as all member states of the European Union, Austria has to develop a national energy and climate plan. There is already a draft version available, which had to be submitted to the European Commission by the end of 2018. We got some feedback from the Commission in June this year, and now there is ongoing work in the amendment of this national energy and climate plan. And by the end of 2019, the final version of this national energy and climate plan has to be submitted to the European Commission. And all these activities, of course, are in some connection with the Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted in 2005. We have, as mentioned before, these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and in addition to that, Austria is also a partner of the Paris Agreement, so we have to decarbonize our full economy and energy supply system until 2050. And this is the reason why in the year 2016, the Austrian Council of Ministers instructed the responsible Austrian ministries to develop a national implementation of this Sustainable Development Goal approach and the Agenda 2030. The main ministry responsible for these activities is the Ministry for Sustainability and Tourism in Austria, which is a very large ministry with a huge range of responsibilities. This ministry is not only responsible for all energy issues, all environmental issues, including climate protection, but also responsible for agriculture, water management, forestry, tourism, and also regional development. So this is a very huge ministry which does the main coordination of this process, and this ministry developed an action plan for the Sustainable Development Goals in Austria. It's the Action Plan 2019 plus. And for the development of this action plan, they evaluated more than 80 programs and activities and actions in Austria that cover the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they did compatibility checks for these activities to show how supportive different activities are for reaching the Sustainable Development Goals, or if these actions are obstacles or barriers for reaching Sustainable Development Goals. And in this action plan, they also described in detail the impacts of the different actions and programs on the Sustainable Development Goals. And now I want to show you very briefly 3 examples from these 80 actions which were analyzed by the Austrian Ministry for Sustainability and Tourism. The first one is something that I've already mentioned. It's the development of the national heating strategy. The main focus of that, of course, is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 37.5% until 2030. That means that we have to reduce the emissions by 3 million tons. The main focus is substitution of fossil fuels for room heating by renewable energy sources. So we want to phase out oil-fired heating systems. We have to renovate buildings to increase the energy efficiency in the building sector. And this strategy will determine all the necessary measures that have to be taken until 2030 in Austria. Because when we see, when we take a look again at the comparison, how much renewable energy do we already have in the room heatings, we see that about 30% of room heating in Austria is already renewable, but 70% is still coming from fossil fuels, which is of course connected with a high amount of greenhouse gas emissions. All in all, there are about 3.8 million heating systems installed in Austria, and more than 50% of all buildings and apartments are heated by natural gas or by district heat. There are already 17% heated with biomass. We have still 16% oil. These are more than 600,000 oil boilers still in operation in Austria, and these have to be phased out to avoid the greenhouse gas emissions in the future. And you see that there is electricity with only 5.6% plays a minor role, but this role is increasing. It is increasing because we are bringing many heat pumps to the system, which of course have additional consumption of electricity as a result, but also they can use ambient heat, which together with solar thermal energy in the heating sector already stands for 9% of the room heating in Austria. So these activities are very strongly focused on Sustainable Development Goal number 7 and will provide a very good approach for the future, because in addition to the activities in the oil heating sector, we also introduce more and more renewables into the district heating systems, and we also bring new customers to the district heating systems, which is very energy efficient in the end. Another example focusing on the increased generation of electricity from renewable energy sources where we want to reach this 100% in 2030. For this, there's one of the first steps is a rooftop solar and storage program, which will bring to additional 100,000 rooftop solar PV installations. And we also support the implementation of battery storage systems to get more flexibility into the electricity supply system. Main focus here are the roofs of private and commercial buildings. So we are not so much focusing when we are talking about solar PV on greenfield projects. So we are in the first years, we are strongly focusing on existing roofs of commercial and private buildings. In the moment, we have about 125,000 of such installations already in Austria, and this program, which is also part of Sustainable Development Goal 7, will bring another 100,000 to the system. But of course, we know that by far this will not be enough to reach our targets in 2030. So our expectations are that all in all, we will need all together from solar PV until 2030 an additional annual generation from renewable energy sources between 22 and 27 terawatt hours a year, and more than 10 terawatt hours per year will have to come from solar PV until 2030. And finally, I want to give you also an idea about a very interesting initiative of the Austrian Ministry of Sustainability and Tourism, which is very strongly linked also to the Austrian Energy Agency, because my colleagues in the agency are doing the overall management and coordination of these initiatives. It's a large climate protection initiative of the ministry, which tries to increase awareness, an initiative which already started in 2004, so we have nearly 15 years of experience with these initiatives. This initiative has many, many different programs and sub-programs to increase awareness, to train professionals, energy consultants, plumbers, installers of energy supply systems. And this is focusing on one hand on the building sector, new energy efficient buildings, introduction of new building standards for energy efficient buildings, thermal renovation of building, energy saving measures. It is also a very strong focus on renewables, especially on the use of biomass for room heating. And finally, it's also focusing on mobility to support a different behavior in the mobility sector of the consumers and the users of transport. Maybe one of the approaches is to avoid driving by car, using public transport, or using sometimes the bicycle and something like that. This is a very, very strong initiative, which is on one hand, of course, focusing on the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, but also on responsible consumption and production, Sustainable Development Goal 12, and also on climate action, which is Sustainable Development Goal number 13. So these were 3 brief examples out of 80 examples of this action plan, which was developed in Austria. And we are now starting with all the implementations also for our national energy and strategy. And I hope that I will be able in the future to give you some, in future conferences here in Belarus, to give you some information about how we are proceeding with our goals and with the developments in Austria. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pavlovich. До сих пор мы слушали с вами представителей
We've been listening to the representatives of regulators, of the government policymakers, and right now we are going to introduce the presentations by innovative companies. Madam Yulia Lakhmotkina, who is the CEO of Schneider Electric Belarus. Good afternoon, distinguished colleagues. It's a great honor for me to be here with you and to make this presentation. Though I can see that many of you are exhausted, but what can I tell you? I promise to be brief, to the point, but if you come to our stand. But I see that you agree. I will probably start with the following. I will tell you about the three things. First of all, who we are. Second, what are the trends that we can see globally, the trends that are going to change the world. And the third thing is going to be the list of examples, how we apply our solutions in real life. So these three things I'm going to dwell on. First, Schneider Electric is a company which is innovative. It is the leader of digital transformation in the field of energy and automation. And we have been working in the market for 180 years, and in Belarus we've been operating for over 20 years. We're a global company having a turnover of over 25 billion euro, but we have to remind you that over 50% of our turnover is coming from automation and digitalization, digital solutions. This is the paramount business. For the last decade, well, it's good to be speaking about the world, but we are in Belarus, and I will probably say a few words about the CIS countries. In the CIS countries, in the last decade, we invested over 1 billion euro, and our paramount goal is not only to localize production, but also to localize competences. This is our strategy. If we're speaking about energy in general, I do not think that this requires a long explanation that energy is important. It's important. We, Schneider Electric, are firmly convinced, we are adamant that life is at the basis of life, and we invent technologies in order to transform places where we live. And if we take a look at the trends, then we at Schneider Electric believe that there are three trends that will change the world: urbanization, digital technologies, and industrialization. Probably we shall say that we'd better remember that not only energy is important, but also access to energy, because all of us remember the energy problem, energy challenge. All of us forecast that energy consumption is going to grow. On the other hand, we have 2 billion people on the planet who do not have access to energy. And I'm not speaking about high quality energy supply. I'm speaking about any energy, like stable energy supply. 2 billion people on Earth have shortage of this. So these are the three global trends that are going to change the world: urbanization, digital technologies, and industrialization. All of us know that demand for energy grows, and it's expected to be doubled within the next 20, 30, 40 years. I don't think anybody can give a clear prediction, but we are sure that it's going to grow. Urban population will also increase. Some people say that up to 2 to 3 billion people, so you can imagine the burden on the infrastructure and the transportation. Many of you would rather stay at home and watch a movie. So I have to tell you, you know how many video clips we download? 7 million video clips. That's what we download daily. And this is quite a lot. Industrialization. When we speak about industrialization, then industry is 1/3 of the global energy consumption. It is expected that the energy used in industry will be doubled in 20 to 30 years if there are no special policy measures. And no matter how much we save and optimize and make it efficient, it will double anyway. And if we take a look at these trends, they bring us to one point. Our world is going to be more electrical, digital, carbon-free, and decentralized. The goal of our company is to be the leader of this transformation at every milestone, at every transformation of energy. In addition, our world is getting more electrical, and practically anything we deal with is electrical or is becoming electrical. Our world is going to be more connected. Practically all of you have some gadgets that are connected to the network. They communicate with the cloud and etc. And if we take a look at that, then over 50 billion devices are going to be hooked up, connected to the network within the next years. 50 billion devices. Our world is going to be more disseminated, distributed. It will be more efficient, and this will be the prerequisite for growth and growing efficiency. We will be able to use electrical energy and energy in general more efficiently. Let's take a look at Schneider Electric. It has 4 sectors to do this. We have commercial and critical buildings, residential stock, industry and infrastructure, and data centers. So when we speak about creating smart cities, smart industries, so these are the areas where we work on around the world, but not only around the world, but also in the Republic of Belarus. How do we do this? We are 180 years old, and for over 20 years of our experience in Belarus, we've got lots of practice in these areas. First of all, in oil, petrochemical, energy companies, healthcare, food, drinks, water treatment. We support the top 10 companies in all these 4 segments. If we take a quick look, then these are the top 10 energy companies in the world use our solutions. Over 1 countries of the world rely on our support in energy supply. We work with water supply and sanitation systems, and 20 top oil and gas companies use our solutions. However, I have to say that we have just changed the profile of our company, and we are striving for turning our company into a software developer, from telematic solutions to water supply management, building management, and data center management, and industrial automation. And the portfolio of our software apps is constantly growing. This is our strategy. Now I would like you to have a quick look at the real applications that Schneider Electric does around the world. Naturally, I'm not going to give you a long story, but let's take a look at the most peculiar ones, and there are 3 of them. This building in Las Vegas, USA. Schneider Electric helped designing and installing a complete building management system, which ensures that you can access the building through hundreds of devices, and to have access to this building. This is a large facility, and we connected it, and we can see all KPIs that are related to resources consumed by this building. So we, as a company, managed to address the goal of the client to manage the people, to manage the building, to make it secure and safe, and to make it energy efficient. I'm not going to tell you about the cost of this solution, but believe me, it was a big figure. Now, the edge in Amsterdam, this is Deloitte, and we helped, this is the building that belongs to Deloitte. We helped them optimizing energy efficiency, ensuring its resilience, and they got an award for sustainability. This is the building called the Edge. This is the most resilient, sustainable building around the world. All experts who studied it recognize that this is the top building. One more example, the last one, I promise. This is the example of digitalization in production. A leading German packaging manufacturer, Solmik, installed this automated solution, and thanks to our solutions, we together achieved productivity that was 200% increased. You will ask me, Julia, you are a nice storyteller. You are giving us examples from Amsterdam, Las Vegas, but what about Belarus? I promised you to give the last, well, I said it's going to be the last example. Okay, we have not one, but several solutions in Belarus implemented. But first, we have to agree with the clients in Belarus that they give their consent for us to use their examples in our presentations. So maybe we will be able to overcome these bureaucratic barriers, and next time we will tell you about our solutions in Belarus. In the end, I would like to remind you, you promised me to go to our stand, and I promise you that our employees will make it a big fun. You will learn more about our software and equipment. Thank you. Will they tell about projects in Belarus? For sure. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Evgeny Shakovets. He's the director of the company called The Filter, joint stock company, and he is going to make his presentation. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to thank the organizers of the event and the Ministry of Energy of Belarus, and I would like to appreciate the organizers, Technics and Communications Exhibition Company, for giving me the opportunity to be here at this conference and to introduce our practical experience of using energy efficient solutions at industrial enterprises where we used to work.
Well, then, a few words about the objectives of our company. We save resources of our clients by reducing the costs for the maintenance of the equipment and machinery supplied to industry as part of the implementation of energy efficiency activities. The principle of work is quite simple: feasibility study, designing, supply of equipment, commissioning and installation, and servicing and maintenance. A comprehensive set of activities required to implement energy efficiency solutions. The area of our expertise is rather conventional and traditional. This is water treatment for drinking water, for power stations, for boiler houses, for food processing industry, and water treatment for pharmaceutical industries. The energy include the projects for mini HPP boiler houses and the boiler houses with thermomass boilers. And the equipment which we supply, it is generated on mazout, coal, natural gas and biomass. In energy, in terms of mini HPP, these are different valves, gas turbine installations, steam turbines installations, and other equipment. So these are water pipe, water generation pipes systems, water pipe systems, the boiler houses with some loops and other constructions, and the fuel, again, diesel, mazout, biomass and natural gas. We offer, most importantly in our company, the engineering solutions for freezing and heat pumps, the heat stations and points, and for the improvement of energy efficiency of boiler houses, modernization of steam condensate units. In terms of water treatment solutions, this is the mechanical filtration, ion removal, air zoning, and etc. The designs developed in Belarus, our largest design and project, procured by Litskaya brewery, and the equipment for water treatment, air removal and coal filtration, reverse air with the capacity of up to 2,000 cubic meters per hour, optimization and remote control and monitoring. We designed the technology, 3D modeling, and re-equipment of the existing equipment, supply of the equipment, installation and commissioning with no stopping of the industry. And now it is successfully operational, and it was finalized in 2015. We also supply equipment for the technological equipment, analyzers, and sensors for auxiliary equipment to analyze water samples and other technological environment, the laboratory equipment, spectrometers, reactive and other auxiliary devices and equipment. The project, this is the system of comprehensive control of the quality of wastewaters for automatization of Minsk wastewater treatment station, Minsk Vodokanal. This is a package of equipment supplied, a series of projects since 2010, 2012, 2014 and 2016. So in our Belarusian enterprise, we supply the equipment. In terms of our heating sector or focus, so these are gas valves, some steam turbines and steam generators which are used in our engineering solutions. Our experience is gas turbine installation procured by Череповец Азот Россия with the power capacity of 32 megawatt hours and the heat power 63 megawatt hours. So we participated in this project and supplied the equipment. Throughout Belarus, in terms of Genbacher, in the Republic of Belarus, the installed capacity is over 26 megawatts with the number of installations 114 since 2002 up to now. We implemented these projects, and now, in view of the construction of the NPP, our devices and assemblies are not fired on natural gas but on some auxiliary gases, methane and hydrogen mixtures. This is the plant Polymer, including the engines fired on the sludge gas and the engines generated by biofuel, so meaning that the area of green energy is our priority, and our equipment we supply is efficient in these projects. And you see the examples of our projects in Latvia for engines, for motors, so they are turnkey projects. The project was implemented from 2008 to 2013 in Belarus. The customer is Kronospan. This is a foreign investor, and the main equipment is 6 engines of 4.4 megawatts. In addition, disposal containers. We supply the equipment and commissioned it, and an important area is servicing of 24/7 with the accessibility of equipment daily, so quite rough conditions set by the customer, but we managed to meet them, and our equipment is under our monitoring on a daily and nightly basis, and very good results. So 2 stages you see from 2015 to 2018. We have the projects. These are power HPPs on solid fuels. So this is the boiler house of over 8 megawatts, the ORC turbine, a turnkey project with the duration of this project in 2012. The energy complex based on fossil fueled fuel. So this is again a turnkey project implemented from 16 to 17. Our technical solutions for freezing machines, compressor and heating pumps, modernization and rehabilitation of heat recuperation systems, which could be provided by our company. The heating point or station in Tallinn, Estonia border, the generator of clean steam. This is a dairy plant in Poland, disposal of exhaust fumes in Aquabel, Belarus, and our greatest advantage in the market is that 50% of our company is the authorized servicing center, the producer of the producers of the equipment we supply, and we operate 24/7, and any types of equipment and machines supplied by us are provided with servicing and maintenance, with the supply and provision of spare parts and components. And this is the approach we exercise, which allow our clients to minimize their expenditures on servicing their equipment in the projects we implemented. You see, the total figures are as follows. The mini HPP, 68 stations with over 22 megawatts, based on GPA 30 megawatts, mini HPP based on boiler houses, 4 stations, based on these ORC turbines, 3. The fossil fuel boiler houses, 16. The drinking water, 220 projects with the total capacity of over 6,000 cubic meters, and over 250 sites for wastewater treatment facilities, the technical equipment and servicing of 310 customers with the contracts of 24/7. I hope that I didn't occupy a lot of your attention, and in my brief speech I managed to show what we can, what we are skillful at, and more information you can learn from our stand at the entrance, and our colleagues and the representatives of the manufacturing plants. They also are a part of our team, and I would like to thank you once again for the attention, for the chance to speak in front of you. Thank you very much, and good luck to everyone. Evgeny, we wish you good luck as well, and success to you, and Alexander Alexandrovich will finalize and wrap up our session. But please, we do ask you not to go beyond the agenda. Please make up the conclusions very precisely and subject matter. Ladies and gentlemen, actually it is not my goal to wrap up the conclusions of our plenary session, but I would like to come back to what actually we started from. This is the third speech in our agenda, which is about sustainable development. I would like to remind you, dear colleagues, that before the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the energy strategy was mainly based on economic principle. And before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the strategy, mainly energy development strategy, was mainly based on getting the most optimal and feasible way of energy development in the country, and there was a method of circled costs and expenditures developed. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we shifted to a different principle, which is called energy security and safety. I will not talk about this at this forum. I've spoken many times with my analysis of energy security, but I would like to say that in our country, the president of Belarus, firstly in the history in 2005, approved the first draft of the energy security concept. In 2007, it was reviewed, and then in 2015, the government approved the third draft of the energy security concept until 2035. Well, the energy security and safety for a long time ahead will remain an important element of our work, but now the globe more and more talks about the sustainable development. What sustainable development is? My slide will include the definition, but I would like to tell you that sustainable development is a more general term than the energy security. This concept includes the energy security, but it includes another two important factors which the energy security lacks. This is the social factor and environmental factor. And before we haven't had these indicators, and now we will have to deal with all this. Actually, I've mentioned this so far, but what else I would like to stress? The contemporary approach to the development of the strategy, assessment of the efficiency of the energy systems is the following. It does not view it as a sector-specific problem. Now, we may not establish or construct something solely being reliant on the parameters of the energy system. At present, we need to consider two elements at once: energy supply and energy consumption, and how they affect each other, the linkages between the two. There are some examples when consumers may determine the policy for energy system development, but here there is a new aspect emerging, that these are interrelated parts of the same system, of the single system, which can be self-regulated.
This is about self-regulation of the generating and grid capacities. So the definition can be as follows. Sustainable development of the energy sector is development of self-regulating system of energy supply, energy consumption, ensuring energy security, naturally, then equal access to energy and satisfying energy demands equally for all people while preserving the environment. This is not an economic definition. This is the definition that we formulated following the other documents, in particular the document adopted in 2015 by the General Assembly of the United Nations Organization. The document was called Changing the World, Sustainable Development Agenda until 2030. This document has stipulated 17 goals aimed at liquidation of poverty, preserving the resources of the planet, including the energy resources, and ensuring prosperity for all. Every of the goals has a number of targets that have to be achieved within 15 years. In the field of energy development, this document envisages that by 2030 we will ensure comprehensive access, universal access to cost-efficient, reliable and modern energy supply, that we will increase the share of renewable energy sources in the global energy mix, that we will double energy efficiency, we will facilitate international cooperation in order to facilitate access to research and technologies and environmentally clean energy, and to ensure all the above in the developing countries. Right now, I would like to show you a few indicators that are typical to sustainable development. And I will give you a disclaimer. These indicators, as it used to be before, have been shaped by the economists. Please pay attention that the economists create some idea at the very beginning, and then we have to deal with this situation. And first, the economic principles have been shaped, and the first indicators of energy security and energy safety were developed by the economists. So the economists in our country are Tatiana Zorovna, who is my co-author. For some reason she is not on the agenda of today's event. She is a young PhD in energy. So we have several groups. The economic group, the second group is technological factors, and for example, energy consumption per GDP. Then there are social factors, for example, accessibility of fuel and energy for the population, also penetration of energy coverage. For example, it has been mentioned today that 2 billion people on Earth do not have access to electrical energy on a stable level. And the economic factors that are very important, they are equally as important as the previous groups. These are the health, coefficient of energy consumption, etc., emissions. The economists developed the formula how all these factors are going to be working. There are over 50 factors, and they have to be unified as one indicator of sustainable development. This is a multifactorial, multifaceted task, and this is one of the options. This shall not be perceived as the ultimate perfection, saying that this is the thing that will ensure that we can get what we need always and everywhere. This is the integral index that we calculated for the countries that are the members of the Eurasian Economic Union: Belarus, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia. Top one, as we can see, is Russia. This is thanks to its powerful energy system. In Belarus and in Kyrgyzstan, we are like top 3, top 4. Next are the indicators that are economic factors, such as accessibility of loans, energy consumption in GDP, but this is a questionable indicator. I'm not sure whether we shall consider this or not. Then naturally profitability and also the share of the dominating energy resources. It's an important indicator. Belarus is top 3 here after Russia and Kazakhstan. The technological factors are depicted here. Belarus, surprisingly, turned out to be the last but one out of these 5 countries. But this is due to the relatively low share of investments in the energy sector and also quite high energy consumption per GDP, and the share of the domestic energy resources in the GDP. This share is relatively low. And the final environmental factors of sustainable development, and here you can see that Belarus and Russia are sharing position of top 1. Belarus has a relatively good standing, and this is explained by the fact that we have significantly reduced emissions from the energy sources. The main pollutant is the transportation sector. And if you take a look at the last 15 to 20 years, then you will see that through a number of arrangements, the energy sector has reduced its emissions by almost 10 times. Now, this is the graph supporting my statements. Now, speaking of the photovoltaic stations, we have the solar panel parks in Belarus. We did not have them before, and today we have 18.5 megawatt in Bragin, Belarus. We also have the wind generators park already, and we are creating a new one. I have just come back from the Central Asia, and the people from Uzbekistan showcased our Belarus-made electrical bus. So they have electrical buses from Belarus riding in Tashkent, and we have them for the last few years. And the last thing, there's one more factor. This factor will play a more significant role in the future. This is about the environmental issues. This is moving to electrical technologies in ensuring electrical safety and security. This is electrical heating supply, electrical transportation, etc. Today, there's the goal of reviewing, and probably we'll do it next year, of reviewing the concept of energy security adopted and applicable until 2035. However, the world has been changing so rapidly and so unpredictably that it is a high time to update it. Maybe we shall not abandon this concept of energy security, but we have to update it considering sustainable development of our country, and especially keeping in mind that the National Sustainable Development Strategy until 2035 is being applicable, so we have to be based on its indicators first. There's the social economic development program of the country that is also being updated, and this will be a good reason to review or to revise the concept of energy security of the country, and I think it may change its name even. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Alexander Alexandrovich. So this is the end of our agenda. We've exhausted it. We planned a discussion to be finished at 16:30. Right now it is 16:30. Therefore, I suggest you to address the presenters when networking with them off the record, and then you will get the answers from them. Thank you very much for your participation. All the best to you.